Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming out on, again, a beautiful fall day. Today's University Hall discussion, and I really want this to be a discussion, is on the governance structures for Eastern Oregon University. What my intent is to sort of quickly go through of how we got to this place so we all have context of where we are, so we're all kind of on the same page, and then go through the three models that are being discussed. What I've done on each of the three models is listed some advantages and disadvantages based on some research that has been conducted through the associated governing boards, as well as with discussions of presidents at other universities in similar situations. And then also just kind of listening to feedback from the campus community. What I'd like to do is at the end of each model is just open up for questions and additional advantages or disadvantages on each of those, and then go to the next model, and then at the very end kind of compare and contrast and have more of a robust discussion. Does that seem fair to everybody? All right. Heather, why don't you go ahead? This is the initial, we're in the initial phase of the discussion. There's going to be multiple discussions throughout, and I think that's important to know that especially when we start talking about the three models today, that they are just three place setters. The way that we are able to frame the question and frame the situation will alter those as we move forward. Also, when today we're just putting some framing discussion points out there, not getting into the need depth and on how some of the things can be altered and changed. I will talk a little bit about that in several of the models of how it can be structured to alleviate some of the disadvantages, and take advantage of the other ones. I also need to point out the three models that we're talking about are just that, three potential models. There could be a fourth model, a fifth model, something that comes up through these discussions that would be even more important or better for Eastern Oregon University. Also, in these discussions, I'm not advocating for one or the other. I'm just, again, presenting the facts as I know them. As we start the process of building business plans around each of the models and really exploring and getting more in depth into those, then we'll start talking about which one has more of an advocacy role from the university. How we got here. In the 2013 session, Senate Bill 270 basically created boards at the University of Oregon, at Portland State, and Oregon State University. In that process, it was clear that legislators and others thought of a mechanism or a way for those universities to be governed. They self-admitted during that process, and one of the things that we kept on reminding them is that they never really thought out, what about the other four? And so we did put in some language that provides a pathway for this discussion to occur, but did not articulate what that outcome would be. Also in the House Bill, or in the 2013 legislative session, House Bill 30, yes, John?
No, I didn't want us to have to stop consent about the budget.
Sure.
So you're talking about the three models, and there may be more, as if we're going to have some choice on this. Is that true?
Let me get to that. Because I think that really builds into it. House Bill 3120 formalized the HEC, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. It also gave the duties that what the HEC will be in charge of. The HEC will be in charge of allocating state resources. They'll be in charge of mission approval and vision approval for the universities at the highest level, and then also will be the organization that will set legislative priorities for the universities and whatnot. As part of, to answer your question, John, in Senate Bill 270, before we got involved, there was no pathway of how the organizational structure for the regionals would be determined. Senate Bill 270 did provide a pathway for that process, but not stipulate what it is. In Senate Bill 270, it states that if a university, one of the true, just an acronym that's been evolving, it's not my favorite acronym, but that's what they use, a technical or regional university, a true university, I prefer the Fab Four, but they didn't like that in legislative lingo. If a true university wants to be governed by an institutional board, they must inform the State Board of Higher Education no sooner than March 1st of 2014 and no later of July 1, 2015. Once that request is made to the State Board of Higher Education, the State Board has 45 days to endorse or supposedly not endorse that request. And if the State Board of Higher Education endorses it, then it goes to the governor, and he has a set amount of time in which to appoint board members to the institutional board, and then they would be confirmed by the Senate. Also in Senate Bill 270, it created a special legislative committee made up of 4 individuals from the House, 4 individuals from the Senate, and 2 individuals from the OEIB to look at and to determine what the appropriate governance model would be for those institutions who did not request an institutional board. And that was also put into motion. So you've got the State Board of Higher Education on the institutional board side, but then you have this other legislative committee for those that do not wish to have an institutional board. What has subsequently happened is that the legislative committee, like good old legislative committees, went to the State Board of Higher Education and said, "What is your we would like to hear your recommendation on the governance structures for those universities that do not either request an institutional board or who are not endorsed to have an institutional board." So the State Board of Higher Education is weighing in on that matter now as well. What the State Board of Higher Education has given to the presidents of the TRUs is a template that will, I jokingly said, that would make an accreditation report look small and meaningless, to go through and outline our strengths and weaknesses, to outline our challenges, to outline where we see ourselves in 5 and 10 and 15 years, and then also through that process listing our strengths and weaknesses and et cetera, but to map out what we would see as the advantages and disadvantages of an institutional board. What would be the outcomes of an institutional board? Would you get more students? Would you not get more students? What is the financial impact of an institutional board? And et cetera. It also does the same thing for a consortium board and does the same thing for a branch campus model. We are then to report back to the State Board of Higher Education in March with those findings, and then in April the State Board of Higher Education would then, and in doing so we are charged with making a recommendation. Recommendation A, recommendation B, and then a non-recommendation de facto. The State Board of Higher Education could or could not take our recommendations. It's totally up to them.
So it seems like there's 2 parts in this. The State Board of Higher Education then is going to weigh in on
The whole shebang.
and if they say they don't think it's a good idea for a particular university to have its own board, but that university applies for a board to do that, the process you described before, it seems like it.
Several outcomes could occur through this process. We could say we want to have a institutional board, just for an example. The State Board of Higher Education said, no, that's not a good idea. We want you to be a branch campus, or have a consortium board with these other 2 or other 3 universities. That would then go to the Special Legislative Committee, and then they would be the ones that would officially put legislation in process for the next legislative year, which quickly think it would be the 2015 session. So a lot of individuals have come to me and said, boy, you're going to want to make that decision. No, we do not make that decision. We have a great deal of influence on that decision-making power, both at the state board level and also at the special committee level. We also have the ability to frame that question and put our best case forward, either for an institutional board, consortium board, or a branch campus model. Does that answer your question? And it's an important one, and I think we kind of got to it a little bit later, but I think that's important to help frame the question. What I decide or what we decide as a collective group may or may not fly. I do believe that it carries a heck of a lot of weight, what we decide here on the campus and in our communities. They're definitely looking to the regional and technical universities for advice and wisdom throughout this process. But like with all politics, there's other things above that I don't know about, and then gets pretty interesting. Okay? One of the key things too, and we've talked about this in previous town hall meetings, but I think it's important to notice. This is, in fact, what is currently going on We have the State Board of Higher Education here with seven universities reporting to the State Board of Higher Education. Rosemary Powers used to sit on that board for 6 years or thereabouts. What's that? 4, okay. I thought you said 14 for a second. I was like, wow. You also have the Oregon student, the OSAC, which is the student representative group, and then you have the State Board of Education overseeing the 16 community college. On July 1, we'll flip to the next slide. On July 1, that significantly changes in that, well, changes significantly for us, in that you have 4 universities still reporting to the State Board of Higher Education, 3 universities reporting to their own board. The HEC becomes in power, for lack of a better word, and then the State Board of Education and OSAC continue in their existing roles. Next slide. What the governor and others are seeing is trying to meld the pre-K up through bachelor's and even master's degree into a continuous system. And so again, this is the overlay of the HEC, the early learning centers, the K through 12, reporting up to the Oregon Education Investment Board. What the governor is trying to do is streamline the process and meld the process together. I'll let others determine if that's successful or not. Next slide. This kind of gets to the discussion that John raised, is the timeline and how we're to move forward. The HEC Commission, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, has had the governor has appointed the members, and the Senate has confirmed those members. The Oregon Education Investment Board has already had their board up and running. The boards for Oregon, Oregon State, and Portland State have been nominated by the governor, but they have yet to be confirmed by the Senate. They will most likely be confirmed by the Senate this November 21, 22 in that neck of the woods, and they are already starting the transition process so that they'll take governance leadership roles on July the 1st. We're in this interesting limbo position of what will our governance structure be. It is definitely changing. One of the interesting facts is I think 8 of the current 11 State Board of Higher Education members have been appointed to one of the boards of Portland State, Oregon, or Oregon State. We are presuming that they will leave the State Board of Higher Education, but they may not. Some other individuals have already indicated that their term is expiring at the end of this fiscal year, and they will not seek reconfirmation. But again, that leaves a lot of different things up in motion. On July 1 of 2015, we will have definitely a new governance model. What that new governance model is yet to be determined. And I will also say it could happen earlier, depending upon what model, what thing moves forward, what ideas are presented. It could happen sooner rather than later. But by law, by July 1, 2015, we will have a different governance model. The 3 models that have been discussed is the Consortium Board, the Institutional Board, or a branch or affiliate model. At the last meeting of the State Board of Higher Education, there is as I mentioned, there is a governance committee that is focusing on these efforts. They have slightly changed the names of these 3 models. I didn't want to confuse them because this is the models that we've been using, but some new words that you may hear for the Consortium Board. They didn't like that name, so it's now called the New Org. New Org. New organization. They didn't ask me on that one. The point, the theory behind it is de facto we have a Consortium Board now. I mean, there's 7 universities under one governing board. We have a Consortium Board. And so what they were trying to do was just kind of say it's a different type of organization, a different type of body, but still something that's very prevalent. Under that, we are a group of universities we would report to one governing board, and then that governing board reports directly to the HEC. On the institutional board, that's pretty specific. Each university or the university would have its own institutional board, and that board would then report to the HEC. The branch or affiliate model is that we would be under the auspices, under the umbrella of one of the larger universities, Oregon, Portland State, or Oregon State. I did offer, what about a school in Idaho? Would that be an opportunity for us? And they said no. I thought it might be more appropriate, but what the heck? No pun intended on the heck. So flipping to the next one, I think again, when we look at the organization when we look at the organizational structure, we need to make sure that form follows strategy. And so the things that we need to be looking at is under whatever model we choose, how are we going to go out and achieve the 40-40-20 established statewide goal? How are we going to meet the needs of serving the students of the region? How do we make sure we ensure access and affordability for our students? And how do we make sure that we have the mechanism in place for student success? We need to take a look at our institutional strengths. We need to look at our financial sustainability, our connection to the region. We need to be true to who we are. And each of the models has advantages and disadvantages that allow that to occur. In doing so, I think it's also important to talk about what does a board do. I mean, and again, this is pretty much straight out of the Association of Governing Boards. Board sets and affirms the mission and vision and the core themes of a university. What does the university do? Hire, fire, and evaluate the president. They ensure, hopefully, access to post-secondary education. They're very much engaged in the long-range planning of the university. They're also there to advocate and ensure that there's the proper resources. They also work with the leadership team to ensure proper management, preserve institutional independence. And that one, some people ask, what does that mean? That's academic freedom. That's to assure that the political winds and factions don't interfere with the teachings of the university, and that the university is able to be the think tank, to be the marketplace for ideas, and not be encumbered by political whims or whatnot. Also within specifically to Oregon, the collaboration with P through 20, making sure that we're playing well with our community colleges, our K through 12, and other universities. Assess board performance. One of the key things that a board needs to do is assess how, in fact, are they measuring up to those standards. And then finally, advocate for the university. Be the organization that is there to promote legislative functions and activities throughout the community and whatnot. So let's talk about some of the boards or some of the models themselves. Option one, in the ideal world, the Consortium Board would contain all 4 true universities. It could be 2 of us, it could be 3 of us, but again, ideally it would be 4 of us. The board itself would be up to 15 members. One of those seats, there would be one, again, just using pre-existing legislation. One would be for a faculty member, one would be for a staff member, and one would be for a student. Under current legislation, the governor would determine if those 3 seats are voting or non-voting members. If you asked me what I would prefer that they would be voting members. And then you would have lay people or individuals who are not associated with the universities directly serve out the other seats. Each of those seats or each of those board members would be appointed by the governor and then confirmed by the Senate. We would also assume that the lay people would come from nominations from the true universities. That is an assumption. Governor appoints, Senate confirms. I mean, that's the way it works. You could get the governor appointing 14 people or whatever from Portland. You know, that's politics at its best. Advantages of the Consortium Board. You bring all the students of the 4 universities together. The last census I saw, that's around 26,000 students. That's a pretty good number of voices to share. The expense of a consortium board would be a lot less expensive than that of an institutional board. Those expenses would be shared throughout. We would be able to maintain most of our policies and procedures. Some obviously would change a little bit, but by and large, they would be able to be maintained. And also, given the relationship and the similarities of the 4 universities, I think that the Consortium Board would do a very good job of focusing in on the students that we serve. When you look at the rural nature and whatnot, we've got a lot of similarities, and also the 4 universities face similar challenges and have similar opportunities. So again, having a board focus on those 4 presents some good things. Some disadvantages. We would be competing with the 3 other universities de facto at the board level to have our proposals and our ideas presented up to the HEC. We would not have that direct relationship of our university directly to the HEC. Board decisions would be based on a conglomeration versus specific Eastern Oregon University policies and procedures, and those type are whatnot. And there's the potential for board imbalance. You could get, in theory, a lot of individuals from the Salem area and Southern Oregon area and have an imbalance. Again, that's something that could just be monitored out, and there's ways that we could probably mitigate those, but those are some of the disadvantages that I've heard from other presidents who are in similar models. Before we jump to the institutional specific board, questions, comments? Steve?
Bob, are there any other economies of scale that we have other than the political cloud? Shared resources or?
I think there's 2 things. One item is what we call shared services. And right now the 7 universities share a lot of resources. Risk management, payroll, a lot of payroll services. Yes, we have our own payroll here, but a lot of our payroll is actually done on the Oregon State campus. Computing power, technology, legal services for those that were at the sexual harassment awareness and prevention training in this room at 1 o'clock. Cindy Starkey is an attorney assigned to Eastern, but we don't pay her full salary. It's part of the shared services. So there is those elements, and the 7 universities will still work with sharing most of those current shared services, not all of them. But a lot of them we will continue to share. The University of Oregon has made it abundantly clear that of all the services that they are mandatory to offer and share, they will do so, but even beyond legally required, like PEB, for example, you have to share. But what's beyond legally required, they've made it very clear they're not going to share. Oregon State is much more part of the share structure service. Beyond that, you're right, there are some other program collaborations and resource allocations that would meld very well with a consortium board. OIT is very interested in working with us, for example, in offering education programs. They don't have teacher ed. There's a lot of grants out there that match STEM and teacher ed that they would be qualified for, and we could be a good partner in that. So yes, Rosemary, I think you had your hand up.
Since this is essentially the kind of structure we've been operating under, how do you see, from your experience, that having the 4 would be an advantage to having the 7?
I think the difference is that we are more homogeneous. Again, I think that the advantage of that is that Southern, Western, and Eastern, very, very similar type of size and scope and program offerings. OIT brings in a very good balance with the technical programs, with the nursing and whatnot. So I think that having a more focused approach, and if we are able to write in certain legislative doctrine, if you will, that the representatives on the board are distributed from, not necessarily from our region, but from the universities that have more of a connection to it. For example, in my previous institution, the governor appointed board members, Senate confirmed, but the senator from the local area had veto power. And so if we would be able to have some sort of Senate veto power in some of those board memberships, I would feel a lot more comfortable of having board members that are dedicated to regional and technical success. Rebecca. No.
And is there any concern on the part of schools who might be in a more financially, a stronger financial position than the other schools? Is there concern on their part about how that would look?
There has been some expressed concern about that. The distribution of funds would be done by that board, and there would be, I think, some interesting dialogues within that. I would also say that the HEC, in my discussions with some of their key members and leadership, are very, very interested in funding regional universities and technical universities at a very different way and different level. So I could see, for example, some things coming strictly from the HEC that would be earmarked to universities that need financial support, us and Southern being them, at the current moment. But we also got to remember OIT and Western, in the not too distant past, were also in very similar situations. And so again, that's that influxness that I think that the HEC is very, very concerned about, and appreciates the value that we add. So being disconnected from the HEC with this layer is a disadvantage, but given the current membership of the HEC and the direction, and I think we'll be okay in the near future. Now, when those people turn over and everything else, one of the things that I've learned very clearly is all three models have great advantages. It's all based on the people, though. It really is. It really, truly is. Donnie?
How likely is it that the consortium would look at programs that are undergoing and then suggest elimination, so students should just go to one of these other institutions for that?
You mean moving the students around from one institution to another institution, so to
Just
be?
eliminating programs, so if you want it, you could go to such.
I can't project the future on that, but I think that this type of consortium board would be overall, at the consortium level, they're not going to get in depth at that level. One of and I think we'll talk a little bit about this under the institutional board, is it's great to have a real focus on that, on a group of individuals really focused on your specific institution. It's also a detriment to have a group of people focused on your institution. They might get down more into the weeds. And so I think that would be something that would be part of that process. Yeah.
That's currently a discussion of program management and duplication piece. Is something that we're
Celia Forbes.
is being asked to work with to the HEC. The HEC is going to assume program approval, curriculum management, all of the institutions that comply with the institutional board, the consortium board. Celia's been charged to try and help the HEC figure out how the provost council functions will translate into the HEC.
Peter?
Well, as we go through these three models, and we talk, and we don't have to do this now, but about how they individually relate to our current financial crisis, or whatever we're calling it, you know, the Fox report and all that jive. Would you talk about how you see our current financial situation relating to the three models, and if one addresses it in a different way than the others do?
I think the consortium board model would have an approach of dictating the meat to bring solutions and present solutions that are bought in by the university and to move it forward. I think the institutional board would be more engaged in that, or again, depending on the people, but could possibly be a lot more engaged in it. The branch campus model, we'll talk a little bit about that one, could have various impacts based on the degree of how much you're underneath that umbrella. I think that under the consortium board, the case is stronger. It can be stronger made for additional state support as long as we are managing the situation at the campus level, as well as with the institutional board. The institutional board would also have a power of the focus to bring a lobbying effort or an advocacy effort to the HEC and statewide legislators for additional funds as well. The branch campus model, I think that because you're going through multiple layers and levels, the likelihood of that is more remote. I think I saw John. If my numbers, they are the largest. They're around 7.5 thereabouts. Southern is 6.5 thereabouts, and then OIT and us are very similar. We're still considered by the standards to be small-ranged universities. Any other thoughts, ideas on the consortium board? And obviously, we're going to come back to these as well. So anyways, flipping to the Institutional Pacific Board, again, using the current language that's in the bill, you'd have 15 individuals, a faculty, staff, and a student, and then the remainder would be quote-unquote lay people. Again, the faculty, staff, and student by law would be up to the governor if they're voting or not. I would make the recommendation that they would be. Again, the individuals would be appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. With this current governor, he does ask for nominations from the various universities. Previous Governor Kulongoski did not. And so I would assume that, especially under the current governor, that would continue. Future governors couldn't tell you. Again, I would propose or would want to put in language that would give Senate confirmation of veto power, because I think that's a good check and balance to maintain the political balance, if you will, or whatnot. Advantages, you obviously have a group of individuals that would be highly committed and highly attentive to ensuring EOU's success. The board would, as I mentioned before, would report directly to the HEC. You would not have that filter. The board would also be specifically charged in representing the interest of Eastern to the HEC and to the legislative body. Under the consortium model, you lose a little bit of mission control, if you want to call it that, because they're dealing with a portfolio, which can be a good thing. With our board, with the institutional board, we would have specific and direct connection with mission and vision and those type of things, which enables a great deal of increased autonomy. A lot of individuals have put forward that there's also increased fundraising opportunities with an institutional board. That's why the University of Oregon sold it, if you will. For us, I think that would increase us a little bit, but again, I don't think it's a huge number, and, well, Tim might disagree with me, but again, I don't think it's something that would all of a sudden tilt the scale and say, oh, we got to have an institutional board. I don't think that's the case. Some of the disadvantages, we would be head-to-head in many respects with the big three. We could beat them on some things and be a David Goliath and win a couple times, but I don't know on an ongoing basis that might be a lot harder. Then there's also the care and feeding of the board. It's not a quote-unquote inexpensive proposition. It's something that would have to be taken into consideration. And then also I need to point out that you would have an institutional board that could be very ingrained in the day-to-day operations. I'll use an example from a previous institution where we did have an institutional board and apply it to a situation that occurred today. Warner Pacific University announced today that they will be adding wrestling. I've received no less than 17 emails on we should add wrestling too. If we had a local institutional board, those board members would be receiving those emails as well. And what happened at one of my previous institutions was not on the board agenda, was not part of the discussion, was not even going to be vaguely on was not even on the strategic planning, but a board member really thought it'd be a great idea, and some of you may like this, actually, I shouldn't bring it up, well, thought it'd be a wonderful idea to add baseball. And so we went into a board meeting, talk about all these other things. At the end of the board meeting, we added baseball. Institutional boards can go a little bit goofy on you. So it is what it is. Like I said, there are advantages to an institutional board. There are disadvantages to an institutional board. What are your thoughts? Yeah.
Do you have an idea of an estimate on what those operational costs would be for?
There will be some initial startup costs, and one of the things that was part of Senate Bill 270 is the famous, what we call the famous do no harm clause. And so some of these expenses we would be able to go back to the legislative body and say to implement, because we didn't start this thing, we're just getting in the wake of it, we would be able to get some of those costs offset. To start up an institutional board and a one-year allocation to get it going is roughly around $300,000 to $400,000. Once it gets going and everything else will be a lot less. We would need to take a look at our staffing. Right now we have Chandra in terms of shared governance. I don't know, there she is. We would probably need another one of her for the institutional board, for example. We would have to take a look at legal services. We would also have to take a look at having an internal audit type of situation. So those things would be part of that discussion.
Would any of the resources that are in the current Board of Higher Ed structure, Chancellor's office, be distributed? We talked about that at one point.
That's what I would say, the do no harm. The current Chancellor's office has a budget of all these type of stuff of around $4.8 million. And so that's where we would tap into. We would probably get that at least for the first 4 years. After that, who knows? But there again, on a macro sense, it would be expenses that would need to be borne someplace. Would they be EOU specific for the first couple of years? Maybe, maybe not. We could probably make a good case not to have them, but taxpayers eventually would be picking up the bill some way or another. John?
So right now we get funding from the state, because we don't pay our own tuition and such like that. How would having our own institutional board impact the funding that comes from the state?
That comes from the state? I think that the thought would be, the theory is that you have 15 raving advocates that would go to the HEC and represent Eastern's programs and projects, either state funding appropriation, and that would go through the HEC, or capital projects, again, going through the HEC and into the legislative body. So they become that legislative lobbying arm, if you will. In some cases, that is very, very powerful, but again, it's the people that you are able to secure and put onto those positions. And so again, it's that advocacy role that they play. In the current makeup, and I don't think this would pertain to the consortium model, it may or may not. In the current makeup, the State Board of Higher Education does not, the board members themselves do not play a large role in that advocacy model. Under the Consortium Board, and specifically Institutional Board, they would do much more. And that also gets to the fundraising component as well. Nicole?
On the WOU site, they indicate that, so Western site, if we did an independent board and it failed, it wasn't financially sustainable or something, and then at that point the HEC would intervene and reassign you to either become a branch campus. Is that your understanding of it too? That if we chose this model and we weren't sustainable or messed it up, that the HEC then is the agency? Is that true?
I have not heard that specifically. I've
WOU's president.
Yeah.
Training, so I just wondered if
Yeah, no, I have not heard that language. In de facto, I think that would be a possibility, because the HEC would be that agency, but then again, they would also be making a recommendation. The legal authority to change the governance model rests with the state legislative body and the governor's signature. And so I'll look at that and make it and read it more carefully, but I've not heard that. Yeah, Rebecca.
So this might be backing up a little bit, then, but what if we ended up, imagine the consortium board, and could 2 years down the road, Western say, actually, we want our own independent board now. How stable is that consortium board once it's in place?
I would argue that unless there are specific things written into the legislative process, it would be very stable. We're in a system now that started 89, 90 years ago. I was talking with Matt Donington, the chair of the State Board of Higher Education recently, and expressed that this is extremely scary. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of unknowns and ambiguity and a lot of what-ifs and woulda, couldas, and shouldas and this type of thing. At the same time, it's very exhilarating because you don't get to talk about what a governance model for a university should be very often. I mean, they don't change that frequently.
Would consortial boards, another way to look at the question Rebecca asked, be a step to institutional boards for one or more of the crews?
Yeah, and again, I think it depends on how you structure it out. One of the dynamics of this is myself and the three other presidents talk very frequently. In fact, we're talking tomorrow. Would be, again, I don't have necessarily an ideal model I want at this particular time, but one of the things would be is, well, would a consortium board be a good stepping stone for the next 4 years? And I wouldn't do it just for 2, by the way. I'd do it for a little bit more than that, 4, and then branch off into institutional boards. And that's a discussion that could be had and was raised over a glass of wine. Very good glass of wine, too, by the way. But again, I think that when you're moving into that step, it is known by all the partners of what is it a transition or is it a full-time consortium board?
So for that to be a transition, it has to be written into the
Correct.
legislative,
Yeah.
the work group.
I would have ultimately be part of the legislation that would be creating this consortium board. Do you have a question, Nicole, or you just?
I'm wondering if you flip it, then hypothetically, you could start out as an independent board and then join the consortium.
If there's a consortium to be had, sure. Yeah, I mean, it could be a situation where, in theory, let's say that two of the universities form a consortium board, the two other ones don't, and for whatever reason, one of them says, oh my God, that was a stupid idea. Hey, can we join you? Yeah, I mean, again, anything's possible. One of the things, too, that is spurring off of this is kind of, quote-unquote, the new models and new ideas. Let me rephrase, it's not really new, I'll get you in a second, Angie. New models, new ideas, is a disadvantage of this, or as compared to the consortium model, is that you got 4 universities not necessarily coordinating and whatnot, not developing that political power. One of the things that I know a little bit about is the Michigan model. The Michigan model is all of the public universities in Michigan have their own institutional board. Michigan, Michigan State, Central Michigan, Northern Michigan, Eastern Michigan, Ferris State, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that they do have, and it is a part of the legislative, actually it's part of the Constitution in Michigan, is that there is a President's Council. And the President's Council will come together and they will collaborate and they will work together on key educational missions and objectives and legislate and work together legislative and et cetera. And so when the 4 of us are talking about the institutional board model is in fact creating the Oregon model in which we would have as part of the legislation, a President's Council made up of the 4 to alleviate some of the disadvantages of being separate. Which I think is a good idea. Do I think that idea all of a sudden makes this the best way to go? No, I'm not saying that. But I do believe that is a way to be thinking a little bit differently than what is just being prescribed as the three separate models, a different way to take a look at it. Okay? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Angie, you had your hand up. I'll get you in a second, Katie.
I was just trying to think about it because you said the shared services for a lot of the separate done things, and of course, my mind goes to things like federal tax ID matters and stuff. How would, if you use this board model, how would you have your own operation over here, but still, I guess I'm confused on how that would work as far as we would just hire them as a shared service and we would still branch out on our own?
You mean for like the legal and that type of stuff? It would be, on some of the services, there'll be a shared service enterprise, for lack of a better word, that we would opt into for those services. And again, under the do no harm rule, some of those things would be paid for us. Other things we would have to then pay for ourselves if we wanted to get the economies of scale. As an organization, as a whatnot, it's kind of a outsourcing, insourcing. Bed, don't worry about outsourcing. It's a joke. Katie.
So in the consortium board, you're talking about an advantage would be the maintaining current policies and procedures. In the operational costs, you're listed as a disadvantage here. Does that include the cost to change those policies?
Most of the policies and procedures we would be able to maintain under this model. Yeah. And actually, under this model, there would be very few immediate. I mean, obviously, you're always changing policies and procedures as need be. But this one, because it would be so focused, it would be a very, in that that issue would be very easy to do. You know, under this model, for example, tuition fees, et cetera, would be very easily set. Under the consortium model, right now, we have a great deal of input to what those tuition fees are. A consortium model may change that methodology, just for an example. Not saying that they would, just saying that they could. John?
So it seems to me that the governor and the legislature probably don't want us experimenting very much. They're going to want us to select a governance model and give it a shot to see if it works. It's like a discussion about, well, if this doesn't work so well, then we're going to go do this. They might be impatient with it.
I think that they know that even with Oregon State, Portland State having their own boards, there's going to be tweaking down the line. And so I don't think that they want us to kind of going back to the discussion with Rebecca and Nicole, I don't think they want us to go into something and say, hey, we'll try it for 2 years, and then in 2 years we'll change. You know, I don't think they're looking at that, but I could see where certain things, if you put into practice, say, okay, we want to do this for 4 years or some, and I use 4 instead of 5 because of legislators thinking 2, 4, 6, and et cetera, that, you know, we want to do this, ultimately we want to get here, but to ease the transition, that makes, you know, kind of a step. I could see something like that possibly working. Again, we haven't discussed that or hasn't been raised to any of the legislators or anything along those lines, but it could be a possibility. I don't think they want us to just try something and say, hey, we'll give it 2 years and then, hey, we'll see what happens. No, I don't. No, they want this to be a well thought out process and to give it the best effort, so to speak. Rosemary.
Well, one of the things that I wanted just to say about that fact is that there's so many moving pieces right now because there's a governor's agenda that's different from the legislative agenda. And while they may be coming together to some degree, that sort of sense of they want us to do something permanent is really not the case. They want us to do something they want us to do as soon as they want us to do it.
Even if we don't want to do it.
I mean, even the way that they have was restructured from a board that I served on,
Yeah.
and then they changed it to make it really be the post-secondary education board and not call it that. So those things are in process. They're not well thought out ahead of time many times before they get to the lawmaking stage. So there's a lot of sausage making in that I wasn't aware of, I think, before I got involved.
And
We could plan something. We could put forward our best shot about something, and there might be a new people on the legislation group that year, and they don't like it. So.
I think Rosemary's point is right on. There are, I mean, you talk about the moving parts and the moving situations and everything else. In legislative the days, it changes daily, if not hourly. Now that we're out of legislation, it changes about every other week. But there are so many moving parts and so many different agendas that is at play. We're really trying to hit, in many respects, a moving target. And that's why I also think it's important that we look at this and have multiple discussions and deal with the things that we can control and know about, but also realize that, you know, things are going to be shifting and altering and changing. We have to put as you said, Rosemary, put our best effort forward and to figure out what is the best thing that we can recommend. I am hopeful that at the end of the day, the politics comes out of it in some respects, and that they do intently listen to our advice and wisdom. At this particular time, I'm encouraged by that, but I also have to admit, I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking, I'm going to get a phone call and says, congratulations, Bob, this is what you're going to do. And I just hope that doesn't happen. I really don't. And right now, I feel that we are in the catbird seat. The Special Legislative Committee has 4 representatives and 4 senators, as I mentioned. On the representative side, I'm going to lose these. It's Peter Buckley, who represents Southern. Greg Smith, who we are not in his district, but knows us extremely well because we used to be in his district. Whitsitt from the Klamath Falls area, and Representative Michael Dembro, who is a community college professor at PCC and heads the Higher Education Committee of the House. And he is one that knows and has a strong affiliation for the regionals. 3 of them I know will go to the mat for our efforts. Mr. Dembro, I do believe that he has very, very good intentions, but you know, he's not tied to any of the 4 institutions. On the Senate side, Senator Hansel, obviously our senator, is very committed to us. Peter Courtney, who carries a lot of weight as the Senate President, who also represents Western. Farad, who has parts of the Ashland area in his district, and I just lost the 3rd one, but Devlin, who also has a great affiliation for the regionals. So on that side, I do believe we have incredible political strength. Thanks for that. All right, other questions on the institutional board? Steve.
Rosemary makes a pretty interesting point. In all of
There are a lot of variables. And again, with the HEC, I mean, I'm very encouraged with the leadership that they've chosen, Tim Nesbitt, who's talked to me specifically about how to fund regionals in a very different and more proactive and more sustainable way. And to be honest, we are again in the catbird seat when it comes to that funding. We are in the limelight of the legislative body, in the limelight of the HEC, and Oregon and Portland State specifically said that they can do it better and raise more money and get more funds from elsewhere, so the HEC is inclined to believe them and provide their allocation to other opportunities. John?
Imagine development officers like pretty close.
Nah.
The big three went out because they wanted independent boards, they wanted to raise money specifically for their campus.
Correct.
So I'm wondering how this is going to work for Tim. If we had our own board, does that make us look good so we can recruit it? If we're a branch of OSU, that's his position to try out.
Do you want to answer that? You want to answer that?
There's always the pay-to-play rule, what we saw with the University of Oregon, where you have a lot of money coming in, and those donors, those alumni want to have a say in how those funds are being managed and expended. That's what you see in private higher ed quite a bit. You don't control the funds you've donated, but you have a say in how the institution is governed and how those funds are spent. Put it in a different perspective, if we were to become part of an OSU branch, whether or not we would have any additional fundraising weight would be interesting, because the foundations themselves are separately run 501c3 organizations, and so they can't be subsumed by one another without a lot of legal recourse. So our foundation technically could operate independently, even outside of the jurisdiction of Eastern or the Oregon State University. So there's like a whole other area that comes up, when you start having that discussion about where it would go. But the downside would be we wouldn't probably see a lot of active fundraising for student scholarships for Eastern, for the branch of Eastern.
And we can flip to the branch model. Let me answer that when we get to the disadvantages of the branch, because I think it's important. Under the institutional board model, it does present more opportunities for fundraising. In the University of Oregon case, they made a very, very strong case. It would have a substantial and transformational type of opportunity, mainly due to 1 to 2 to 3 donors, one obviously very large one. Do I think that it would help Eastern's fundraising opportunities? Yes, I do. At that level? No. I mean, we unfortunately haven't discovered our Uncle Phil yet, but maybe we will.
We'd like to have that problem. We
would love to have that problem. So, but again, I think that out of the three, if you were looking at it from a fundraising perspective, which one has the best advantages down, the institutional board, consortium board, and then the branch campus. On the branch campus, or affiliated model, there's kind of a continuum of how far it would go. There's on one side of the continuum where basically we would maintain a sense of independence, especially in the early stages, where we'd be semi-autonomous. We would have an independent nature, especially in the early days. Early days meaning the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years, maintain our own mission and vision and those type of things. But over time, we would gradually go into more of the mothership, so to speak. But what would be clear, though, is that the approvals of the main campus and the board would dictate all future efforts by the institution. That would be our board. That would be our organization. Under that model, I would report to, and most of the discussions have been Oregon State and Eastern, so I'll just use Oregon State. What the organizational structure would be is I would report to Ed Ray, and then Ed Ray would report up to his board. And there would be always that buffer between myself or this university, the president of this university, and the board. Under the integration model, which would eventually either start off that way or the semi-autonomous would gradually go to, is that all of our curricular and co-curricular programs would become more uniform with Oregon State policies and procedures, and obviously as time went on or going into it immediately would gravitate towards the Oregon State model. And then the third one, which is on the opposite end of the continuum, is that we would truly become a campus of Oregon State University. the Bend campus being an example of that model. I have had very robust discussions with Ed Ray and actually have more to come, because this is also one of the most ambiguous of the relationships of the three models. The other two, you can really point to some specific things and see how it will work here in Oregon. With this model, there's a lot of continuations and a lot of continuums. There's the Penn State model, there's the University of Pittsburgh model, there's the Washington State model, and they all have different affiliations within them. But even with that, and let's go on to the advantages and disadvantages, there are some common advantages and common disadvantages under this model. An advantage could be a brand enhancement. In Eastern Oregon, we're very, very, very well known. In Arizona, not so much. And so there could be some opportunities, if you will, to leverage that brand. There could be some possible programmatic collaborations with existing programs at the Corvallis campus. And there's obviously political leverage. Under the integrated and the branch campus model, that political leverage is not necessarily needed, because you're already at the disposal, if you will, of the main campus. If we remain to be an independent university and have that strong independence, that political leverage may come into play. Another model is the University of Montana and the Montana State model, which again are integrated out, and those efforts of political is not necessarily there because everything is funneled through the mothership. Disadvantages, especially over time, we have less control over the mission and vision of the institution and academic programs. We would not have access to the HEC at all. That would go, again, strictly through the Oregon State, in this case, the Oregon State Board and the President. We would also have no or very, very limited say in who's on the board. That, again, would be controlled by the President at Oregon State. New programs and I think somebody asked a question up there. I think, Donnelly, you asked a question about duplication of program efforts. That comes really into play under a branch campus model, especially if you're talking about adding new programs or programs that are perceived to be under-enrolled. There's a very big discrepancy between what you would have in the control that you would have in that area. Internal competition among various offerings could come into play as well, and again, the role of that president at Oregon State would be instrumental in determining how those competitive factors played out. Again, as I think I mentioned to Nicole early on, a lot of these type of success or advantages or disadvantages is contingent upon the president or people at hand, in this case the president of Oregon State. Many of you reminded me of your days in Bend and the role of the president at that particular time. It's a different bailiwick. Centralization of services would also lead to less flexibility on our part. Again, maybe saving some costs, but again, having financial aid or whatever the case may be handled in a very, very different manner would have a direct role. Shared governance is an interesting one. In a lot of the branch campus or the affiliate models, the shared governance bodies at the branch or affiliated institution is advisory to the main body at the main campus. So the faculty senate, for example, would advise what the policy should be. The faculty senate at Oregon State would then determine if that's a good decision or not. And that's a tough one. That one's a real, real tough one. Again, policies of the main campus would take precedent over our campus here. Tana.
Question, going back to the variation for this option. Would this be something where we would really have any say in which variation was opted for if we chose it? Or would it be kind of like you sign on and turn over rights that come to us?
I would say that initially we would have some say. I think initially we would have some negotiation power, if you want to call it that. I think that, however, over time, that significantly changes. And you're at the whim of some very interesting political factors. When you look at the University of Montana system, Montana Northern, Montana Western, et cetera, they had a president who was very engaged and supportive and did a lot to work for the regionals. The new structure is not so much. And so it really shifts. There's some things you obviously could put into the quote-unquote bylaws and everything else. But again, that's a really interesting political discussion. Again, Rosemary said there's a lot of moving parts. This one introduces a lot of moving parts in my mind. Also, I need to point out one thing, too, is financially speaking, I think someone over here, John maybe mentioned the financial speaking. Ed Ray has made it very, very clear that there would be no Oregon State dollars going to the branches, that it would be, the branches would need to be on their own, so to speak, in making those financial decisions. Donald?
I taught at Penn State Harris before coming here, and there the shared governance, essentially Penn State didn't care what we did. So they paid attention, so we had our own shared governance. But more importantly, the promotion and tenure requirements were specific to the union commission. That was a huge advantage because to get tenure at main campus Penn State, you need 2 books positively reviewed.
Yep.
So very few of us here would get tenure.
And thank you for bringing that up. I think I had that on the written document, that tenure and promotion is almost centrally located. In some cases, they are not, but most of them are. And that's a really, to me, a very red flag.
Yeah, you would send your portfolio to OSU to be evaluated, so, and the missions are very different. I like OSU fine, I think they have a strong commitment to teaching, but nothing like ours.
And I agree with you, Donald, that the styles are very different, and I'm glad you brought up the tenure and promotion. I thought I had thank you, because that is an important one.
One more.
Sure.
What would happen to the faculty union contract?
I don't know.
Our contract is, you can't obviate it. OSU doesn't have a faculty union, so, and even if it did, it would have to be a vote to start having.
I've asked that question of 2 different lawyers and got 2 different answers.
Perfect.
So,
My son's in law school, I'll get a third.
yeah, I want a third one. Yeah.
What about athletics?
Again, it depends on the continuum. If you're at the integrated level or the independent, the athletics would most likely maintain. Ed Ray has made a very strong stance, for lack of a better word, that we would change our name to Oregon State LeGrand or Oregon State Eastern, and one of his board members insinuated that, and become the Beavers, and black and orange and et cetera.
We still have athletics around campus.
Under the first 2 models, most likely. Under the branch campus model, most likely not. Which some people may like. Yes, Sandy.
If we think all these options and all the levers that are being pulled, option 3 seems the less likely. Does it to you, in your opinion? Just because if all these other bigs are in the process of taking on this new board, that's a lot of changes for them to be happening, and then all of a sudden taking on additional universities under their umbrella as well.
From the discussions I've had, the pushing factors are not pushing this model. This model has the greatest amount of change and trepidation and downside implications from what people have talked about. Is it a model that needs to be discussed and vetted out? Absolutely. Just a second, Rebecca. And so is Oregon State or Oregon, or Portland State for that matter, looking to have branch campuses? No. Ed has made it clear in my discussions that he's willing to have the conversation, but it's something that he does not want to instigate, and if he didn't have to, would not want to take it on. But that was a discussion that we had a while back. Again, we've talked, we're going to be talking some more here pretty soon about that. But again, I think there's much more positive and more individuals interested in the first 2 than this one. Rebecca?
I want to say that I think that's unfortunate in general, because I think that from what I've seen, that this model, this third model, we're almost sort of There are other models where a branch campus sometimes specializes in a certain school or offering certain sorts of programs. The other thing is that, from what I understand over the last 5 or 6 years, branch campuses across the country have experienced increases in enrollment. When people are really trying to figure out why that is, in part because sometimes people are placed down geographically. They may not want to travel to one of the bigs. And I have to say that I think that in Oregon, right now, that point that was made, which I think is important, that the bigs are experiencing a major transformation here with the new board, you can make an argument that that's exactly the time that you should consider making all of your big changes and bringing on branch campuses. And I would hope that people would not dismiss this option because we're afraid of losing autonomy.
Excellent point, Rebecca, and I don't think that we're dismissing it. At least I'm not, and I know Chris Maples is not. In fact, Chris is actually working with the University of Oregon and having some meetings in terms of what that model would look like. I'm having the same discussions with Ed Ray at Oregon State. Again, I guess I chose Oregon State or talked to Oregon State because of some natural connections and whatnot. Could there be a situation that made it work and made it pliable, made it a good model? Absolutely. I mean, I don't know what they are, but there could be some things. The challenge will be is he's got a board coming on as well, and a lot of those type of discussions are going to happen with that in conjunction. I think all three of these models, again, have strengths and weaknesses. And so suggesting it out of hand, what my goal in charge is to be buyers beware. What are we getting ourselves into in any three of these models? And any three of these models has great advantages and distinct disadvantages. And again, it also goes back to knowing the people and players at play.
And I don't want to hold the floor, but just to follow up.
Sure.
When I hear Ed Ray say, well, you're not getting any of our dollars, I'm thinking, well, is Ed Ray really going to be able to make that decision? Where does that come into play? So I'm not sure.
Heck would be able to come into play with future dollars, but with the current dollars, that's a different discussion. Yes?
So is there something to be learned by looking at how OSU Bend operates? It seems like if they were going to have another branch, they might like the branch they have in Bend and follow a similar model.
There's a lot to learn from the Bend experience. Yes, absolutely. And also where Bend is trying to go with their campus/university in that area. So yes, there is a lot to learn in that area. And as Rebecca suggested, there's a lot to learn from other models and take the best from them. Penn State is one. Pitt is another one that I'm fairly familiar with. Just across the border, Washington State has branch campuses, as does Washington. And each one has certain elements about them. There are some key questions, and what Ed Ray has described as deal breakers, and those are some of the things that we need to put on the table. Ray?
What impact does this model have on tuition and student fees?
Again, that's a discussion that would need to be held with Oregon State and their board. The board technically would be the one that would propose the fees and whatnot. Again, under certain variables, they would, and to use Bend as an example, they set tuition and fees at the main campus. And the Bend campus has input into it, but it's ultimately set and proposed by Ed and moving up. In some cases that's worked, in some cases in terms of program development enhancement, that hasn't worked so well. So again, there's a lot of flex to that.
Answer this question, what about our affiliated campuses? So we have Oregon Dental, the Sciences University, under this model, with OIT, how would that affect us? How would it potentially affect with OHSU and our working with them?
I would assume, again, keyword there is assumption that we would be able to maintain those under all three of these models. I think that's something that, again, would be worked out through the time, but again, I think those would, the assumption would be that they would continue. And also, John, I think, going back to you, since I was looking right past you, our relationship now with Oregon State and how that relationship works with our ag program is also kind of indicative of how that relationship would ultimately work.
So, since we're looking my way, we have education has relationships with a number of the community colleges, and we have centers for our business program. It's sort of the same question about all that.
And Oregon State has the open and /E campus. And I think that will be a very interesting discussion of how those two would continue to work independently, to merge, to cooperate, to coordinate, to whatever. And to me, that one is a very interesting and dynamic one, and one that cannot be, I think, ironed out over a few discussions. To me, that will be a very interesting and prolonged discussion. Other ones on this specific model? All right. I think that's my last slide. There is, and this is not the end of the discussion, this is just kind of to give everyone a chance to ponder and whatnot. There is the governance website, eou.edu/governance. On that is a survey. I do have printed surveys here if you choose to use paper and pencil instead. But if you do that, please know that I have to hand it over to Heather, who's going to input it into the online survey. So please do it online if possible, humanly possible. This survey has been up for about a month or so, and we've received quite a few comments, but I'd like to continue to receive a lot more. It basically goes through and says, which one do you think is the best? Well, actually, what are your general observations about institutional governance? What do you think are the most important attributes needed through our governance model? Please rate the governance model by agreeing or disagreeing on a Likert scale. I chose 1 to be strongly agree and 5 strongly disagree. I had a psychology professor tell me we should have been flipped, but there she is. But anyways, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this model? And it's for each one. And then it also asks you to kind of put down which one do you think would be the best model for Eastern, and why? Consortium, independence, whatever the case may be. Feel free to utilize that tool. It's important, I think, to have that feedback so that when we do present this information to the State Board and others, that we're able to say, faculty weighed in like this, students weighed in here, community members weighed in here, et cetera. So, go ahead.
Will we have information on the financial impact and the legal impact, for example, to the union here before we fill out that question?
The financial impact, we're working on some of those details now, but again, I think that under the consortium model, the financial impact would not be extravagant. Under the institutional board model, at least for the first couple of years, I think we'll be able to have our startup costs weighed, and then with the branch model, again, not a significant impact. The union one is a very interesting one, and that one, again, is something that we've had several lawyers continue to weigh in on, and for this discussion, I think the fair assumption would be is that the union contract would remain. I think that would be a fair assumption. Okay. General comments, general thoughts.
Not that we should go off of what others are saying, because I'm a little bit of the UFO, but I'm wondering about the other 3 institutions within this consortium. Have those presidents strongly voiced a direction, or is there opposites flowing there as well?
I think that, generally speaking, we have a continuum. What we're all trying to do is present the information and gather the information, and kind of what Rebecca said, is not to write one completely off, or put one forward as the very best model in the world. But to do an honest and job of researching and which one would be the best for the institution. Having said that, I think OIT is very strong on an institutional board. I think Western is very much in favor of a consortium board. Between those two, the one thing too is that we've been looking at these and analyzing these for quite some time. But again, I think that there's strengths and weaknesses to all three. I think for long-term survival and long-term viability and whatnot, the consortium or institutional board seems to be a little bit stronger. But again, I've got a lot of research to do on the branch model, and that may change.
So is it an all or nothing? So what I mean by that is all for...
Oh, for the consortium?
Consortium, right. So...
No, I could see where there's three and one. I could see that scenario working. I could see 2 and 2. I could see, I mean, I don't think it's all one for all or none or whatever that Three Musketeers phase is. But again, I think that one of the things is that all four of us are working very hard together and communicating and keeping each other in the loop so that we're trying not to have any surprises on one or the other. I mean, a bad outcome would be 3 institutions say, we want institutional boards and get institutional boards, and the 4th institution says, we want a consortium board. Okay, congratulations, you got a consortium 1. So we are working very, very close together and keeping each other abreast. Nancy. Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah.
What in your mind are the next steps after you gather input from this campus and the other presidents gather input from their campuses? How do you communicate with us? Is there another opportunity?
I think there's going to be various town halls. What I would like to do is collect and gather and present the business plans and whatnot, get something down on at least on a tentative basis by the end of this term, and then have town hall meetings and beginning of the next term to say this is, it could be 1 model, it could be 2 models or whatever, and have very, very robust discussions like this and ask quote-unquote what-if questions. Technically or whatnot, the schedule is that in the March-April timeframe is when we would present our recommendations to the state board, and then they would quote-unquote make their recommendation to the special legislative committee shortly thereafter. So we don't have a lot of time. I mean, it's not like, you could just twiddle your thumbs and not do anything for the next 3 or 4 months. But at the same time, we do have at least some time to build these models out. Nancy? We haven't talked with Mark at Western or Mary at Southern about if they had a druthers. Mark and or Chris Maples and I have talked. Again, they're, for whatever reason, he's kind of thinks that their best partner in that would be the University of Oregon. And I don't know why he chose them. I mean, like I said, I thought U of I would be better, but then I said, okay, we'll do Oregon State. What's your second question?
You mentioned OSU's campus.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm wondering whether you all are tracking the impact of competing online programs on our programs. Because we've been in the business so long, we've sort of had a lead on everybody else, but it feels like everybody else is now catching up to us. And if so, what is the competition likely to do in the next 5 to 10 years to our population of online students?
I think the competition is catching up on us. In some respects, it has caught up. I think we need to continue to advance some of the strengths that we have, which is the personalization, the centers, for example, and that outreach effort, and move forward on that. We are still extremely affordable, especially when you're talking about a full degree online. When you look at it a credit-by-credit basis, Oregon State is a little bit cheaper than us, but once you get past, I think, 6 or 7 credits in a term, they dramatically exceed our costs, so again, cost structures and whatnot. But I think the online space, as I talk in marketing, is getting more and more competitive, and we need to continue to advance on that. David?
Do you think the advantages and disadvantages of each model in terms of operational funding is essentially the same for capital funding also?
I think that, I think that, yeah, very much so. I think, again, the representation, the advocacy, and those type of things very much play into the capital funding as well. And to be honest, maybe more so, more sensitive. Because there you're dealing not only with the HEC directly, but then you need to be dealing directly with legislative efforts and whatnot. And despite the University of Oregon saying that they only have 5% of their funding come from the state, almost a lot of their capital is coming from the state. Not all of it, obviously. They don't fund the football center, but that's going to significantly continue to increase. And some models will parlay into that stronger than others. Colleen.
With regard to the survey, what's the closing timeline?
It's going to be open for a long time.
Will we have access, will we be able to see the phone?
Oh, sure. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think we'll do a running tab, but yeah, absolutely. I think ultimately, when I do the final report, it actually says what are these results. But I don't want to create a rat race and a polling and this, that, and the other, and that type of thing. But no, yeah.
I would just be curious to know what others thought about it.
Sure. Absolutely. And also on the free forms of these too, as you can add advantages and disadvantages and whatnot, we'll update the PowerPoint presentation to reflect that. You're welcome. Other questions, comments, concerns? Well, with that, I thank you all for your time and attention, your advice and wisdom. As mentioned on several occasions, this is the first. We'll be giving a similar presentation to Faculty Senate, if not mistaken, November the 5th, and have, again, a series of discussions on that, University Council, et cetera. And then as we develop these plans and update, we'll do that as well. So again, thank you very much.